the remainder. You've endured. Perhaps we should simply have 14 minutes of silence. But I've been asked to speak. In 1955, a group of Quakers under the sponsorship of the American Friends Service Committee wrote a booklet called Speak Truth to Power. It was an impassioned plea to address the growing militarization in American society and nuclear proliferation. One of the authors was our own Guilford alumnus, Bill Edgerton. Another author was Bayard Rustin, a gay, black Quaker, after whom Guilford's own LGBTQA Center for Activism is named. Ironically, Rustin's name did not appear on the first edition of the author's list because of his homosexuality, but more about integrity and speaking truth to power in Rustin a bit later. But there was another Guilford connection with that pamphlet, albeit a little tangential. And that's Levi and Catherine Coffin, who I think illustrate the concept of speaking truth to power. And I want to use them as a backdrop for my comments today. This is Quaker PowerPoint. This is Levi and Catherine in their old age. Levi grew up in the New Garden community. He was born in 1798, descendant from Nantucket Quakers who settled here. The same community that produced Lucretia Coffin Mott, the famous women's suffragette, the Indian rights activist, the anti-slavery advocate, Lucretia Mott. The Quakers who came in from Nantucket, joining those who were already here from southeastern Pennsylvania, were staunchly anti-slavery. But that was added to for Levi and Catherine through several incidents here. For Levi specifically. As a young boy, Levi was helping his father chop wood along what is today's Westridge Road, just a mile east of us. And as they were chopping wood, a coffle, a group of manacled slaves, were being herded along what was then New Salisbury Road, today's Westridge, off to market. And little Levi asked his father what that was, and he explained in impassioned terms about the evils of slavery and the inhumanity of that peculiar institution. Later on, as one of his chores, Levi went out to feed the hogs that were running in the New Garden Woods, part of their farm, part of which is now the back campus of Guilford College. And in searching out the nests of these hogs to feed them, he would find fugitives from slavery who were hiding out in those woods. They would bring them food and would listen to their stories of hard masters and cruel treatment, and became even more emboldened to do something about slavery. That opportunity would come sooner than he could possibly have expected. Just a few miles from the Coffin's farm was the 550-acre plantation of David and Rachel Caldwell. Now, David Caldwell was one of the most important men in all of North Carolina at the time. He was born in 1725 and lived into his 99th year in 1824. He was a Princeton-educated divine. He started the first presbytery in Piedmont, North Carolina. A self-taught physician, an educator, a patriot, involved in the Regulator Movement, the American Revolutionary War, the War of 1812. He was the most widely respected man in North Carolina. He was offered the first presidency of the University of North Carolina because of his stature, although he did turn that position down. And he and Rachel were also slave owners. One day in the early 1800s, their son, recently married, his wife pregnant, were about to move off to Charlotte to start a new life. And they asked for help domestically, since they would be so far away from home and family. And the Caldwells offered their son their slave woman, Edie. Edie was desperate for this not to happen. She had a husband, she had small children, she'd just given birth to a child. She pleaded with the Caldwells not to do this, but they would not relent. And so Edie, desperate, ran away, hoping that the circumstance would change, that the Caldwells would change their mind, and the place she ran to then was the New Garden Woods, the Quaker community, where she knew that she'd be taken care of if she needed. And indeed, after several days hiding out in those New Garden Woods, our back campus, she and her child grew cold, hungry, sick, and they went to the Coffin Home for assistance, and they were taken in. As little Levi heard the story of Edie's situation, he developed what Quakers call a concern. A concern is a response to a pressing issue that is grounded in the truth of your own experience, the truth and traditions of your own community, discerned in that community, and it demands action. Little Levi, perhaps 12 years of age at this time, felt that he had to confront David Caldwell. How could a minister of the gospel do something like this? And so he asked permission to go and confront the Caldwells. Well, there are two problems here. One is you got a 12-year-old kid who's about to confront an 85-year-old most important person in North Carolina. How's that going to turn out? Secondly, if Levi blows the whistle on the fact that his family is harboring a runaway slave, they can be prosecuted, imprisoned, their property confiscated. His parents gave their blessing. They walked through about 5 miles of farmland and woodland to confront the Caldwells. Can you imagine what's going through his mind as he's about to confront the towering figure of David Caldwell? But he does. He's welcomed in as he knocks on the door. He's recognized as a child of the local Quaker community. And initially, Caldwell just banters with him, saying, "You know, we Presbyterians make decisions a lot faster than you Quakers." But then they get down to brass tacks, and they say, "What are you here for?" And Coffin asks him, "Are you missing one of your slave women?" He says, "Well, yes, Edie. Do you know anything about her?" He said, "Yes. She's at our house, and I've heard her story, and that's not right." And, long story short, Caldwell relented. He did not send Edie away. Now that is speaking truth to power. It doesn't depend on your age, your gender, your race, your nationality, your creed. It depends on being rooted and grounded in truth, discerned in community, with the will and the courage to act on it. I want to illustrate just briefly a few other examples of that by taking on a virtual trip over to the cemetery at New Garden. Don't worry, you don't have to get out of your seats, you don't have to be spooked, you don't have to go on my 2-hour Halloween night trip to the cemetery. But I want to illustrate just briefly a few others. Mary Mendenhall Hobbs, a faculty member of the New Garden boarding school, wife of the first president of Guilford College. In a patriarchal culture that did not value the education of women, she started a cooperative residence program so that women could receive an education here at Guilford, and petitioned and lobbied the legislature to open the first public college for women in North Carolina, 1891, today's UNCG. Close to her is Clyde Miller, the fourth president of Guilford College. During World War II, he invited Japanese American students to this campus out of internment camps. In 1962, against the wishes of a powerful businessman, politician, former mayor, chair of both the Board of Trustees at Guilford and of North Carolina A&T, strict segregationist, he strategized the integration of Guilford College. Embarrassingly late, but again ahead of the culture. Pete and Lucretia Moore, who in 1948 took a leave of absence from Guilford, aided refugees in Gaza after that war. 1953, Pete wrote a letter to the Board of Trustees calling on the integration of Guilford College. 1955, they signed a letter, along with 36 others, to the local paper calling for integration of public schools here under Brown versus Board of Education, resulting in the dynamiting of neighbors, hate mail, crosses burning, the loss of businesses, the loss of jobs. Integration followed 2 years later. And in 1962, Pete strategized with Clyde Miller on how to integrate Guilford by bringing Kenyan Quakers to campus. And then finally, Alethea and Vestal Coffin. In 1819, aware that John Demery, a free black, was being kidnapped, was already bound with ropes and about to be hauled off into slavery again, interceded, and that night got him on the path to Indiana that became the Underground Railroad, the first passenger, the first conductors that we know of in Guilford County. Those of us who work in this community are as individuals to speak truth to power, to address marginalized populations, the disenfranchised, those under military occupation, are standing on the shoulders of those who've gone before, who blazed those kinds of trails as surely as those on the Underground Railroad. And we know, like them, we will meet resistance. But remember the words of Lucretia Mott, mentioned before. Every great change will meet opposition because it shakes the very foundation of privilege. We will meet opposition from our friends, from our colleagues, even from our institutions. You're making our customers, our students, uncomfortable. You're going to scare them away. This is bad for business. You're going to lose donations. You're going to lose business. This is making people emotionally unsafe. This is too controversial. You're getting out ahead of the culture. That's exactly what Robert Fraser, the chair of the Board of Trustees, said to Clyde Milner and Pete Moore. It's what happens every time we confront privilege. There will always be that blowback because it shakes the very foundations of privilege. You're supposed to be balanced. Another great argument. Fair and balanced. Remember the words of Bishop Desmond Tutu. To remain neutral in a situation of injustice is to take the side of the oppressor. We will meet resistance. It will be difficult. But if we were grounded in truth through our own experience and experience of our community, we discern this in our community, we have an obligation to act. It will be difficult. When Levi Coffin was asked at the end of his life to reflect on his violation of every community standard of his time, he said, the dictates of humanity were in conflict with the laws of the land, and we chose to ignore the law. We've heard many concerns expressed on the stage today, wonderful concerns that beg for our action, that beg for our involvement, our concern, many concerns expressed that if we act on will lead to mending the broken world. But to quote another Quaker, Thomas Kelly, we can't die on every cross, nor are we called to. We have to have faith in the others who will take up those crosses. But we've got to find our cross there, hoping we don't get nailed to it, but trusting that we are rooted and grounded in truth, and we discern this in community. We have an obligation to act, and we cannot do otherwise.